So I'm going to be answering one of the questions that you guys asked me, and here it goes. So, with your approach to BJJ being systematic and heavily influenced by modern developments, can you share what it's like to earn a black belt in the traditional old school style, only to later realize that you need to revisit and overhaul your entire game to align with the evolution of the sport? Now, this is a massive question, and I talked a lot about this in my podcast with Jack on the Spider Web. I'm gonna answer this question in throughout different videos. Just in this video, I wanted to give a little bird eye view of what I think happened in the development of the sport and what I think most people haven't really caught up with yet. And that is the fact that the traditional old school approach, slightly disorganized, slightly not very systematized, was based on a sport that was basically in its beginnings, right? It was based on a sport that that just didn't have that many things, right? The amount of data that as a student you had to process was very, very limited. And therefore you could get away with, as it were, with a slightly sort of disorganized approach. Now, what's been happening for the past 20 years is that the sport evolved, adding more data without backing this data up with a underlying structure. So basically what happened, in my opinion, is that the sport grew and people invented or discovered positions, and they just sort of added data points. And so you had a multiplication of guards, a multiplication of styles of passing, a multiplication of just positions and strategies overall. But the point is that this growing in the sheer number of data that the student has to process wasn't accompanied with a parallel development in the structure of the sport, the structure in which this data is conveyed to the student. And so what happened is that the student is faced with an enormous amount of data, but no underlying structure to put this data in place. And so part of what I try to do as a coach, is it goes in both directions. So as you say, sort of this sort of revisit my game had to do exactly with this core problem. On one hand, trying to reduce the amount of data that the student is presented with as a beginner, and at the same time try to enhance the underlying structure in which this data is plugged into. And so I try to sort of hit both sides of this issue. Well, what I think happens a lot is that coaches are led to present as much data as possible, but they don't put enough attention to the underlying structure. And so, to answer this question, one of the big challenges that I was presented with when I sort of started realigning my jiu-jitsu and my teaching with the more modern approach is to limit the amount of data in a certain way, going in the opposite direction in which the sport seems to be going, which is sort of adding more stuff. So reducing the amount of data on one side, and on the other side, sort of augmenting the amount of structure in which this data is plugged in which this data is somehow presented. So this would be a first approach to kind of answer this big question, and it's just food for thought. It's something that I've been struggling with a lot, especially because obviously as a coach, you can feel the need to present as much data as possible, and because obviously you want to, you think that that's where your worth as a coach is where you shine in presenting as much material as possible. Well, actually, for me, I think the reason why people seek my advice when they start jiu-jitsu, I think what they're looking for is a combination of reduction of data they're presented with and sort of more structure in which that organizes this data.